We're recording. Okay, Julian, we good to go? I'll start introducing you. No need to fret. Okay. So, hi everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. It is morning for me, so that was weird to say. This is the third event of our speaker series, What the F Do I Do with My Degree? Which is a speaker series made up of people who have degrees in sociology or anthropology and are doing something with those degrees. Tonight we have Julian Posture. We are very honored to have tonight, who's an illustrator and a researcher who will be talking about what he did with his degree in anthropology. We'll have him talk a bit about himself, about his time at university, what he's doing now, and then we can open the floor to any questions people may have for him. So, Julian, I hand it off to you.
Thank you. Yeah, like I was saying, since like we're like a small group of people, like don't like hesitate to like interrupt me or anything during the talk, because there's no point of me like just doing like a super formal thing, especially if I'm on a roll and like I just like never shut up. So like just don't hesitate to like ask questions during the talk too. I'm just going to share my screen if I can. I can't. Can you like allow me to do it? Yeah, that's great. Oh, I'm just gonna. I have two screens, so it's always like a little bit. Do you see?
Yes, we do.
Okay, so you see the front page, right, of the talk?
Yep.
Okay. All right. So, hi everyone. So
also, before you start, we can also see kind of the other stuff that you have as well, if that wasn't what you planned. So like the little screen with the timer and the, I think, the illustrator at the back.
That's probably the wrong one. How about now?
Yes, that works.
Okay, great. All right. So yeah, thank you so much for having me. Today, I'm like Siobhan was saying, like I'm going to talk a little bit of my background. I have like this very zigzaggy like background, like where I went to art school and then anthropology, and then I'm like now I'm back to being an artist. So I'm going to try to make sense of that and talk a little bit more also like of my professional work right now as an illustrator. But before that, I also co-founded like a co-op of anthropologists, actually. So maybe that will be interesting for you. And so through all that, I'm going to try to make sense. It was actually a very interesting exercise to prepare this talk, because I've been like, it's been like a few very intense years, basically, and for the past, since I graduated in like the end of 2017. So it was nice to like pause and like reflect a little bit more on all that. So to give you like a brief like recap of what I've been up to at school, like I started like school with a BFA in printmaking back in France. I went there like with this very clear idea since I was a kid, basically, that I wanted to be an artist, an illustrator, or a comic artist, like these kind of things. And as soon as I got to the BFA, I realized that like there was so much more to art than what I thought, and I started to really focus to discover the printmaking facilities. So everything from like screen printing to etching and all those things. And I grew an interest in landscape. The reason I'm talking about it like in this talk to like anthropologists is because since then I've learned to understand landscape as a very cultural and historical object. And so back in the days when I was doing my BFA, I was interested in landscape, but like mostly from like a very aesthetic point of view. an art history point of view, where I was trying to like understand what it was, and in doing so, I started to read some anthropologists, like mostly like anthropologists working in the environment sphere or in like the visual studies kind of vibe. So, and I and I started to understand that the way they were seeing landscape was like completely different than the way I was learning to understand it as an artist. I remember like Philippe Descola, this French anthropologist who recount like who tells this story where like he was in the field. His field is like in the Amazonian forest, and he recounts this story where like he's on the top of like a bunch of trees with like his friend, and he asked and he just said like, oh, that's really beautiful, like looking at the landscape around him, and he saw that like the person he was talking to like couldn't really and this like didn't really get it, like what he meant by that, like how this like piece of land was like beautiful in itself, and he kind of sensed like this like gap in the translation, and that he didn't have a word to express landscape in the language he was speaking at that moment. So he started to understand, to kind of question this very notion of landscape as very cultural, and to me that was interesting as a bridge between studying art and studying anthropology. And it's kind of like the moment where like I realized that this is what I wanted to do after. Um, it was this possibility of understanding something that I could fully naturalize in my own culture, in my own cultural background, which is like this very European art history around like landscapes, like the most natural like understanding of it. Like I can't take a train and like look at a piece of land without seeing a landscape. Um, so so this little like glitch basically in my art school time was really important for me, because this is when I realized that I was kind of living in a bubble up until that point, and that I needed to like basically broaden my interest and like broaden my understanding of things. So I finished my program, I finished the BFA, and I was about to enroll in an MFA, but then like 3 weeks before, I just like sent them an email, told them like I won't be enrolling, I won't be coming to school, and that I was moving to Montreal to study anthropology. And that's what I did. And so I did like the BEA in anthropology at IDM, and I was really drawn to like Montreal and like Northern American anthropology because of like the forceps field thing. I think Concordia has it the same way, with like linguistics, ecology, blah blah blah. So I was really excited to like go as wide as I could in this understanding of anthropology. And very quickly at the very beginning of my BA, I realized that like it's obviously still had the same interests in visual culture, in landscape, but this time I was kind of learning to make sense of those things through anthropology, which was like really eye-opening in a way. And during my time, I think like I was kind of like a nightmarish student for any professors in the department. Like I was the one like forcing them to see me during like office hours, like all the time, like because I was coming from this very like art background where like the school was super informal. There was no grades, there were no like classes. It was like this very artsy like European vibe. And so I got to university and I found it was like so formal, but in my mind, like I was very entitled to like spend as much time as I could, like making the most of like what I paid for, basically. So I would like I asked professors to help me create like clubs and stuff like that. Like I started like a linguistic anthropology club when I was at the end of my undergrad and like at the beginning of my master's, and which was really fun. Like we were basically talking about everything that we didn't really talk about during class, during regular curriculum in linguistic anthropology. So we were talking about like queer linguistics and like like interspecies communication, like all those like fun stuff that we like that wasn't part of like the curriculum. And then I was so hooked at that point, like after my BA, that I kind of forgot about art really, and it was becoming clearer and clearer in my mind that I wasn't going to pursue a career in art anymore ever again. I was fully identifying as a researcher and like an anthropologist, and I was really excited to do like the MSc. For the MSc, because like with, I mean, we have a BA, but we have like an MSc at UDM, like it's a bit like weird, but it's a bit interesting too, because like there's this whole like biology aspect to anthropology in the department that is quite strong. And I remember like one of my professors, who is like this like primatologist, was super insistent in framing anthropology as a science, which is always like this super touchy topic in the department. So that was interesting. But the point is, I started the MSc, and at that point, I was really excited about linguistic anthropology. That was really what like made the most sense to me, coming from like an art background, like semiotics and like language and communication was something that I was related to. So I did my master's on the topic of Buddha's images in Myanmar, and specifically like the consecration of Buddha's images, mostly statues. I think it's interesting to like now, like in hindsight, to like reflect on that period, because I had this very strong theoretical interest for doing an MA or an MSc, but I had no idea of where I wanted to do it or on what topic specifically. I just knew it was going to be about visual culture studies and economics and materialism and semiotics. Like that was like my conceptual approach, but I had no idea where. So I talked to my like advisor, like the advisor that I wanted to work with, and this is when like I should have been more I don't know, like I should have known better basically, but I kind of get sucked into his projects, and now like years later I realized that that wasn't the best move for me for so many reasons. But basically like he was working in Southeast Asia, and he was like preparing this project around like Buddhism in Southeast Asia, and he told me about Myanmar, and how that was like this very like new quote unquote like field work, because the country at that point had been closed off like for 50 years after the coup of 62. So I was like, okay, sure, like let's try. So I spent like one summer there, and then like for like 3 months, and then another 3 months the summer after that. So 6 months of field work in total. And I mean, there was like obviously like an amazing experience, and like field work is like such a super important part of what we do, and it was great, and all that, and it really allowed me to develop the tools that I still use today as a researcher, and to understand things. And it's funny because like I went there to study images, and now like I'm on the other side of images, and I'm making them. So it's really important for me to have understood like how images are being constructed, how our values are being assigned to them, and the role they have in societies. But what I would say, if like any of you is like doing like undergrad right now, considering like a master's, is really to understand like what's your interest and what's the interest of like your advisor, and kind of like try to like be open, but also like draw the line at what you're comfortable or not to do. Because, for example, one thing that I didn't plan at all was that as a queer person, it was going to be really hard to spend like that much time in the closet again, basically, because not only it's not like a very like queer friendly like space in Myanmar, in like urban Myanmar where I was, but also like the very translation of queerness as a cultural concept is so hard that it could have been like my whole like research project to deal with that only. So like in Myanmar, for example, there are then the way language circumscribes and describe gender and sexual orientation is very different than like in European languages. So there's no like one-on-one translation for like gay or lesbian or queer or transgender or whatever. It's all like mixed up, much more like it's much more intertwined, and also some terms are only derogative, so there's no neutral term for certain like categories. So it's like super. Anyway, the point is, it was kind of rough to like spend that much time like back in the closet after years of like being like openly queer in Montreal. And this is something that I never really thought of thinking in terms of like thinking of a field work and thinking of a research project. Mostly I realized because in anthropology departments, sociology departments, like we don't tend to talk about sexuality outside of like as a topic of research, but we don't think of like talking too much of sexuality on the fieldwork and the sexuality of researchers, which is kind of crazy in itself, because like we expect people to spend like during a PhD to like we send researchers to spend like 18 months on a fieldwork, but somehow we never have the talk to like, hey, what am I supposed to do with my desires and like during this time, and like how is this going to affect my fieldwork, how is this going to affect like the quality and the nature of my data, like all the things. So it's yeah, it was really interesting to experience, but definitely, for example, that led me to not pursue this topic and this region when now I'm kind of considering going back for a PhD. And I know that like this would be my number one priority, would be not to reproduce this kind of problem, because also like so much of field work, especially long-term field work, lies on trust with the people you work with, and intimacy, in a way that if you're constantly lying about who you are, for example, for any reasons, this can become like very, very problematic, and yeah, it can get ugly. But yeah, so that was for my, like, I'm talking about the bad aspects right now, but actually like the masters are like such an interesting thing to do, and again, like I've learned so much. Mostly like things that I still use today is like this understanding that images are not simply these like merely symbolic, like visual, immaterial things. They are very much made by concrete social, economic, like cultural relationship between different actors, and they like circulate networks, and so really making sense of all the things I realized today really shaped the way I'm an illustrator, and the way I make illustrations, and makes me more aware of like how I produce images, and how I create images that then are going to circulate themselves in a social like group. So it's super, like I'll be talking about it later, but on the topic of queerness, obviously, like now I'm the cultural producer who create representations to put in the world. So whether I work for like magazines or branding or stuff like that, those things are like always super present in my mind. And I think it's like because I've spent this time as an anthropology student to like really question those things from a research perspective. So yeah, that's what I would say about the masters. And then there was the life after the master, and it was hard. I don't really want to like. It's fun because writing this, I caught myself like writing to be on the verge of like writing like, oh, I did this, I did that, that was amazing, blah blah blah. But then I realized that that was so ingrained in me as a freelance worker now to like sugarcoat struggle and to over focus on like success, that because it's part of like our neoliberal like society and like to ideologies to only present yourself like when you're a freelancer, like your income and like everything relies on you presenting yourself in a certain way, and failure and like hardship is not really like a selling point most of the time. So yes, I'm gonna try to be like as like transparent about this period of a few years before I became an illustrator and like after I graduated, it's a couple of years where I've applied to like so many jobs, and definitely stuff that I was like overqualified to do. But what I realized is that like obviously I didn't have the most like employable profile. I mean, like a BFA plus an anthropology MA, like it's definitely not the sexiest thing for employers. But also something I found really striking in Montreal is that like when you think of it, we have like 4 universities, all 4 have sociology departments, 3 of them have like anthropology departments. It's a lot of people to compete against on like a job market. So that was something, and also like even the moments where like I would get to the point where like I would get the interview for a job that I was like really qualified for. Like for example, once I remember I applied for this job as a research like professional, whatever, on a linguistic anthropology topic with the University of Moncton. They were looking for someone to go in to do interviews like francophone in minority settings like across Canada. Like it's very like classic linguistic anthropology, sociolinguistics research. But obviously I didn't get the job because someone had done their MA on the very same topic. So no matter how like qualified you are, you always end up against someone who's done years of work like on the very job. So yeah, so in that regard that was hard, but also like there are also other experiences of like some of my friends who used their fieldwork, the way they did their fieldwork during their masters, really made them more employable, basically for like working for NGOs or like stuff like that. And they often like NGOs have like research programs attached to them that they work with other universities, and so they're always looking for people with like fieldwork experience and research background and all those things. So that was definitely also an option. Then I worked a little bit in social economy with volunteers and like in like placemaking, which is like in a way very like a very problematic kind of thing, even though it's like social economy and it's like great, like we're working in like neighborhoods and stuff like that. But there also like there was also like this flip side of like having a very critical thinking background, like social sciences and stuff, that suddenly nothing is ever good enough in terms of ethics. I like when I was working in this environment of social economy, like and placemaking and all those things, like the only thing I could see was like gentrification and like social cleansing and like all those things of like let's get rid of like homeless people and like let's just put flowers here and like we're creating events for like residents, but like who's fitting into the definition of a resident in this neighborhood in this project, these kind of things. So so all the things like made it hard to find like the right spot for me as a graduate of like anthropology, and to work in a way that was like fit, that would be a good fit with my values. So I mean, it's definitely possible. It was just hard, and eventually I just get kind of sick of it, and I've co-founded a co-op. So that was like my solution, was like to not try anymore. And it was like my dream when I was doing my MA was like to provide ethnography, like quality research services to social organizations in Montreal and Quebec, because I could see the power and the insight that you can get from qualitative research. And after working in like social economy, where like people are obsessed with just like filling surveys, I realized how like much like beneficial it would be for everyone to have qualitative research being done in this environment, and like to connect people and stuff. So um, so I looked up online after a few months, like I looked up like if that was a thing, because I remember meeting someone who were doing that in France. She was like this PhD student, and she was working with this company of like former anthropology students who worked for like very big business, like in luxury stuff. Basically, it was like market research, but like a little bit like branded as like ethnography. But obviously, what I was doing, what I was like dreaming of, was way more like grassroots and like socially driven. So I looked it up online, found this organization called the Collaboratoire, which was like co-founded by this like two anthropology graduate, basically like two women, and so I reached out to them, and I realized like they were at the very beginning. It was just like a website that they created, and that was it. And so I joined them, and we decided together to like fund, like to create a co-op. So we would all, like the three of us, would be like on equal footing, and to start reaching out to people. And so the mission was really to offer quality research to socially driven organizations in Montreal, to support the need for understanding the groups and the community they work with, and also assess the projects that we're implementing in those communities in a very qualitative way, versus just like dumping a service on them and like just hoping for the best. So that was very exciting, because like I was saying, like sometimes like you can feel, especially after a long job search, can feel very like daunting, and like can feel like very like sterile to think of like your prospect as an anthropology grad. And so that was definitely like a super exciting project, and super exciting like yeah, just experience for everyone, really. Like every time we would reach out to someone, like we've had interviews with like the city, and with like social organizations in Montreal, like nonprofits and all that, and everyone was like blown away, because like no one had any idea that you could do that to understand people, that you could just like spend time with them and talk to them and see what they're doing, and doing a bunch of interviews, and then making sense of all that, and connecting it to a broader social context. So every time we were describing what we were doing, they were like, oh my God, like, and we had amazing like contracts going on. Like we worked with architects who wanted to create social housing in Griffintown. So we got to do this whole like several month long research, where we interviewed a bunch of like current and former residents of Griffintown, like Griffintown being this over gentrified, like it's not even gentrified at that point, it's just like the neighborhood has been destroyed by condos, and all the community organizations there just like had to flee, and like people get evicted. It was like a whole nightmarish situation. it was really interesting and powerful to do that, because at first those architects had only the idea of like doing a public consultation. But public consultation, the way like the city does it most of the time, it's nothing inclusive. It's really just, it's always the same people who show up to a public consultation. And showing up to a public consultation and having a voice there involves understanding all the codes of like those like very formal events, and it's obviously at certain times of the day, so not all people from like all background can like just get free and like at like 5 p.m. and then like show up and like give their opinion on neighborhood life or whatever. So obviously those like more classic way of like understanding communities are super problematic for so many ways. So in Griffintown, like reaching out to people who live there, who get evicted, and like just spending time with them, going for a walk in the neighborhood, and like getting to hear the stories and all that, like made up for so much more than any other sorts of like consultation could have done. So that was like one project we did. Another one that I worked on for like a whole year was the assessment of the impact of like a theater program in French as a second language classes in middle schools in Laval. And to me, that was so exciting because as a linguistic anthropology like grad, like it was everything I loved. It was really how performance and like theatrical performance was helping those like teenagers to really get like a feel for French beyond the very like school framework kind of thing. So because most of them would come from places and environment where they haven't been at school either at all or in years. So just understanding like the culture of like homeworks and like staying inside for like 8 hours a day and like listening to a professor, whatever, was already so complicated. So learning a new language on top of that and performing in that was super hard. So the theater program was this really great way of like balancing it and giving like a new outlet. So in that case, linguistic anthropology was like this super interesting tool where like I get to observe like each theater classes there for like several months and to talk to all the professors, have informal discussion with the students, and really understand how like linguistically, like what was the benefit of this program on all of their experiences. So that was like the kind of thing we were doing. But everything's come to an end, and like after a while, like I stopped, like I quit the collaboratoire in 2019, like mid 2019, because mostly because of like interpersonal like problems. Like I didn't know those two people like beforehand, and that was also like one thing that I should have like considered before starting a business with them, that like we weren't particularly compatible as like friends and business partners and all the things. So eventually like it got messy, but the structure still exists and like in different form, and actually just split into like I quit, and the day after like the other person quit, so she started her own like anthropology business, and so now there's two of those, and I'm doing my own thing. But yeah, so that was like, I like to talk about this because like that was definitely a very creative and very interesting way of capitalizing on your degree in a very non-traditional way, and in a way that we never really like talk about because it just doesn't really exist that much. And it's interesting, especially because like when you study like sociology and like any social science at university, you always like being like drawn to having an impact and be engaged, and like obviously have like political values and like social values and stuff like that. But at the same time, when you can only foresee your life as like an academic, it's hard sometimes to like reconnect those things, because we talk about like the ivory tower and all those things. So it was definitely interesting to see that like there are other paths, and you just have to kind of have like the imagination for it, and like definitely like also like the massive like luck and privileges to like kind of knock at all those doors and like create those structures. But so yeah, so eventually I left, and because at that point, towards the end of that, I started to draw again, which I hadn't done in like years at that point. And I started to draw again, and like eventually I found my work being more and more like serious, and I started to send it to a bunch of magazines. And I started to get answers. And actually the month I quit the collaboratoire, I get my first gig for the New York Times, which was really exciting as an illustrator. And from then on, like it just became like my job, like full time. So I feel like this jump from anthropology to illustration really paralleled like mirrored like my jump from basically art school to anthropology school. It was really on a whim, and I just felt it, like that I was going to be happier in that direction. And I think it's important sometimes to like kind of listen to yourself in that way and be like, ugh, like, am I doing this because it looks good in my resume, or am I doing this because like I really feel it? Because on paper, if I had listened just to my like ambition in a way, I would have stick to anthropology research and this co-op, because it's everything I loved, and like it's everything I wanted to do as an anthropologist, and it looked amazing on my resume to like have this kind of like experience. But really like deep inside, I just was craving like making drawings and like being creative in a different way. So yeah, so May 2019 went back to illustration, or actually just like went to illustration. Um, and it was like I was saying in the part about like my master's degree, it was like just super fun to finally be on the other side of images, and instead of like just studying them, instead of decoding them, I was the one encoding stuff, and I could really use my like everything I've learned so far in anthropology to really make the most of it. So I'm going to try to make sense right now of how anthropology made me a better illustrator, I guess. So I think the biggest thing I've took from my background as an anthropologist is really this very reflexive understanding of images and like of their role in society, the link they have to language and representation. So this really drives like my work in a lot of ways. Like for example, like this is one of my early illustration called Crying Dudes Comforting Each Other, and dude is like this like classic case study in linguistic anthropology on gender and masculinity, and like it's like this very culturally loaded term, like a dude, and like how we use it, how we like subvert it, how it encapsulates like so much of like masculinity and what it's made of and everything. So as an illustrator, like to me, like illustration is really this like powerful way of connecting images and word and text. And text in the much broader sense of the word. It can be text as like the way structuralists like anthropologists were thinking of it, as like text as like culture as a text. So in this image, like it was really fun to subvert the word dude by making them like having this deeply emotional connection, which we don't usually associate to like dudes, and to be like comforting each other and to be surrounded with plants and affects and like to be really connecting with one another and with their own emotions. Another aspect of that was like the following one was like men growing balls. Again, in that aspect, in that way of like understanding language in a very literal way, and how to make images kind of like make sense of language in a special way. So to me, like men growing balls, like we don't know this like very like basic expression, but illustrating it in a very literal way like makes it so like different, like in a way it just makes it just anchors masculinity not in the supposedly like courageous, brave, whatever implied by the expression, but really rooted in like care and growth and like all those values. Another thing that I'm working on right now is like translation. I'm working on this book. It's like this picture book where I illustrate homophones, but between English and French. So I take words that sound the same and I illustrate kind of like an in between them. And again, like you can see how like image kind of make new meaning comes out of language. So in this case, like ash, which is like an axe, and ash, which is a frêne, like a type of tree. So yeah. And this one, like, I'm sorry, like we can't really see like super well. Like, can I do? Ah, I if like, oh yeah, I think it's better. Yeah. Okay. For this project, like, it's actually very directly inspired by my anthropology like studies. It was really a Gregory Bateson work about like cybernetics and like semiotics and like systemic thought, and this series of images is about how we can see the same image and just by the caption, just by language, completely see different things. And it's really interesting because like the other day I was giving a talk to sociology students at UDM, and we were talking about like the way language, like the way verbal language is much more important in our society than images in the way the values we attribute to it. And caption really shows that very clearly, that like you have an image and like you have a caption underneath, and like the way the caption is gonna like really change your perception of the image is super interesting, because that's what happens when we like watch the news and like when we look at anything, like verbs, like words are always kind of like influencing our perception of visual things. So in this series, I'm really playing with that, like all those like little spiky things, like sometimes like can be a sun or a virus or a surprise or a massage ball or like these kind of things. So that's like what I'm really interested in as an artist now. It's like this relationship between word and image, and ultimately between just the way we talk about things and the way we show them. I think what anthropology taught me across like all those years of like working in different fields, but like specifically in illustration, is it really gave me tools to understand my work and my role beyond beyond the definitions already available for me. What I mean by that is that in illustration, for example, you get this like thing like illustrators are at the very bottom of the chain of the creative industry. we are being underpaid, we're being like just overlooked, and it's like this really kind of like shitty spot to be in as a creative. But being an illustrator made me realize, and it can be really toxic because you end up, if you don't think about those things critically, you end up naturalizing those like systems, and they just become part of yourself and the way you see yourself and your work. Um, but thanks to anthropology, like I get to step back a little bit, and unlike other illustrators, most illustrators, I feel like I get to have this very broad and systemic context of the creative industry, and kind of I get to name and recognize power dynamics in a way that I can see like my colleagues like are not necessarily aware of, um, and in that way, like it's very empowering because it makes me more uh, aware of the things, and I get to like call them out more often. This is also like why I think I got involved very early on in my community, like of illustrators, and in like a union, and like to really think of like how to have a greater impact on the system rather than just to be alone. Because kind of like I was saying earlier about like being a freelancer and like always focusing on the positive because it's like your like selling point. Being a freelancer often like means being alone. And I think anthropology taught me that like it's never a good thing to be alone, like it's just not human. So I think it was important for me to like understand very early on that I could be a freelancer and I could also like create networks of solidarity and to defend myself and others against abuse. I think critical thinking again is like the best thing ever that I got from like studying social sciences. I think it makes up for like a healthier like practice. For example, often I'm being asked to make my characters more gendered, um, and I feel like if I hadn't went through like all those classes and all this like questioning about like representation and gender and all those things like from a social perspective, I wouldn't be able as much to defend my point like and stand on my ground. So like now often with client I'm just like, no, there's a reason why my characters are not gendered. It's like, and if I have to show very particular identities, it has to have a reason. So all those things are like very important to me, and I get to develop like the how to articulate those ideas and those points to clients and like everyone to for that. I've also on a very pragmatic level developed like a writing practice on top of illustration and a very research practice, which very pragmatically led me to have more have like another stream of income, if you will. Like I get like I give talks, like I write, like this is like really fun to do on top of like an art practice. But also writing has really helped me connect with other people, and I realized how much a social science perspective really alleviates a lot of weight from people's shoulders about the struggle in life. I think in a way where like when I was talking, I wrote a lot about style in illustration, and style is this very anxiety-inducing topic for illustrator because you gotta have one style, but it's not really natural and blah blah blah. And the way I deconstructing the notion of style from like a sociological perspective, and sent it to like a bunch of illustrators, and now people read it, and like I often get comments from those pieces of writing I did about that I was putting in words and I was articulating ideas and connecting things that people weren't able to connect themselves, and that felt really amazing for them because like they realized that like they were not alone, that their problem was part of a system and not only their own, and like a neoliberal like agenda I want to make you believe. So so I think in this way, it's like super important to use this awareness and like this critical thinking that you get from your background as an anthropologist to make other people's life like better. I always had this like weird dream that instead of like psychologists, like therapists, like we could have like therapists trained in like anthropology and sociology, and like you could talk to them about your problems, and they would give you like the systemic reasons why you have all those problems, and like instead of like trying to change you, like they would just give you the tools to change the system and to be but I don't think that could work. And on a very pragmatic level too, like I think being an anthropologist allowed me to be able to work on like different projects than anyone else in my field. I often am contacted by clients because they know I have this background in anthropology, and they're like, hey, we have this super tough topic that we need to talk about, like socially complex or written by like a researcher or anything, and we don't want to give it to someone who doesn't understand like this lingo, basically. So so that definitely played in my favor, and also like I think being an anthropologist like made me rapidly, so I was saying like earlier, getting involved in my community and like through association, union, and stuff like that. But also like when people see what you have to like the way you think as a social scientist, I feel like they're very likely to give you more and more kind of responsibility very quickly. Because for example, like my understanding of like copyright law and ethics from a social science like perspective made me work on things for the association of illustrators in Quebec, like from the very beginning, like even when I wasn't like fully a member yet, like they really needed this perspective, and I think it's really nice to be able to participate in that way. And finally, like some takeaways. I think like what I've learned or what I wish I had known like when I was doing my undergrad. As I was saying, I think it's important to find a balance between what your guts tell you and what you can afford, but also like making strategic decisions. Like when I was looking for a job and I realized like no one cared about like my research on Buddha's images in Myanmar, like I kind of felt like I should have done something closer to home and like kind of think a little bit more pragmatically about like my my masters. I think also like trust that the skills you're getting right now are important. Like there are like what we call like soft skills in a way that like those are not very like marketable like hard skills or whatever, but I think very quickly people recognize the input, the valuable input that people with our kind of training has, and very rapidly they are willing to let us like speak more and have more like space to try out things and to kind of like move things in a certain direction. Because I think the way we learn to think as like in social science is so important, and it's like so powerful in so many ways, and I've got to like witness that like firsthand. So I think it's really important to like really trust that it will be recognized eventually once you get a job. And yeah, like just I think what my main takeaway was like to learn to contextualize things, learn to never forget that things are part of a system, that actors have different agendas, that there are power dynamics, and that naming them already helps like making them less unequal. And hold people accountable, and also like that's the fun thing also like yeah that I love about social science, because it made me more able to hold people accountable for like the power they hold, but also more empathetic to people that I didn't understand at first or that didn't understand me. And I think that's like a major tool that you can use all the time afterwards. So yeah, and also asking questions. I feel like having done like field work and quality research like for a while, I feel like asking questions and knowing how to ask questions, because it's such a particular skill to know what question to ask at what time and in what way. Um, I think it's such an undervalued like superpower, and I think like it's going to be very helpful like forever. And that's it. Thank you. I think I've talked about it all. I'm going to switch back to yeah.
Thank you, Julian, for that very insightful and interesting aspect. Like there's so many, I'm glad we're recording this, because there's so many things that you talked about that I think aren't, I'm not sure what the best way to put it is, but like it's there's things like you bring up that I don't think many people talk about, or that's very unique, or maybe not unique. I don't know how to, I can't find the words, but I guess I'm just very like, not blown away. Yeah, blown away. Like I can't find the words, because that was just a really interesting and amazing presentation. Thank you a lot. I can't even come up with a question, because you were so, you covered so many things, and I feel like you answered a lot of questions that would come up in my mind. But if anyone else has questions, please ask. Thank you again, Julian, for that wonderful presentation.
I have a question. Yeah, I don't know. You kind of talked about this a little bit, but maybe you could discuss a little bit more. It feels like anthropology specifically, because our department is anthropology and sociology, but I've met so many more artists within anthropology who, after this degree, are going to pursue artistically inclined fields. I have a friend who like transferred from McGill anthropology because she wanted to do a double major in dance at Concordia with anthropology, and then she was like, okay, I like anthropology, but I'm just going to do dance. Like there's so many artists, like I guess my question to you before I start rambling is, what do you think it is about anthropology specifically that draws so many artists?
I think it's very like at the beginning, like I had like a very cliche and superficial understanding of anthropology, obviously, because I like before I came here to study it. But I think in anthropology, maybe the main difference is that because, especially Northern American anthropology, who has this big focus on like culture versus like social society, I think there's so much work in anthropology that deals with like art and like cultural forms and like performance and like all those things, that I think that there is this like thing that just kind of draws us to anthropology a little bit more. And there's also like a very strong tradition in all art fields to draw on anthropological research to create work. Like there's so many artists, like whether it's like contemporary artists and visual arts or dancers or musicians or whatever, who kind of discover someone's work in anthropology and kind of like draws on that to create like art. Often it's like I mean, again, like I did when I was in art school, like it's like this sometimes very superficial way of understanding what anthropology is or what social science like does. But I think, yeah, maybe this is why like there is like already like from both sides like an interest in the other. And so maybe it's like easier to like draw a connection when you're a student and to be like, oh my God, that makes so much sense. And it does. I say it makes so much sense, but obviously like my parents don't think it does makes any sense. But it really does. Like I was saying, like I studied art and I was like questioning the concept of landscape from a cultural like perspective. And that's what I got to do as an anthropologist, like to question like visuality and like visual culture. So yeah, I think it makes it easier.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, now that I think about it, like way too many times when I'm taking my anthropology courses and my theater courses that are more theory based, they seem to always be able to speak to each other very directly, which is very easy to me as a student to like make those linkages, but it's also just very interesting. Yeah.
And also like, I know like, for example, as a linguistic anthropology like student, like a lot of what I was reading was about like literature and all those, and performance and all those things, because the concepts we use are very similar. So yeah, there is also like a very theoretical like connection there.
Yeah, for sure. Does anyone else have a question? Murray, it kind of felt like you were wanting to.
I on my head that I don't even know if I have a question, but thank you. That was really, really interesting. But I was just thinking about, the conversation you were just having, like, I think it like definitely makes sense that there's so many like artists that end up in anthropology or begin in anthropology. Cause like when you were talking about your fieldwork, I was like, oh, word, like fieldwork is to anthropology as like residencies as artists. Cause you have to like, it's all about that embodied experience that you really have to like immerse yourself into, like understand what you're doing. I think that's very interesting. But I guess I kind of have a question about the writing practice that you developed, because like obviously in anthropology we have to write a lot, but it's completely different from like a more casual writing practice that you would develop. And I wondered like how the transition was from like being used to like writing these like giant research based papers to something that still is like very based in like your understanding of like anthropology, but I guess more digestible or like more accessible.
Yeah.
How was that transition?
No, for sure it was like really hard, and it still is like it's such a different way of writing, and for different audience, obviously. I've got into, like when I was a student, I was mostly reading just very theoretical work or ethnographies. So I was like fully like in this thing. But then when I graduated and I finally found myself with like a lot of time to read other things that were not for school, I started to read essays. And like creative nonfiction is such an interesting bridge between what we do and as anthropologists, sociologists, and like the world of like literature. And because it's like this intertwining. I'm thinking, for example, one of my favorite collection is by Alexander Chi. It's like How to Write an Autobiography, and he's like this queer Korean American writer who did this beautiful collection of essays about just like growing up as Asian American in US, but also like becoming a man and becoming a queer man, and like HIV and like all those things. And basically what he does in his essays is like intertwining personal accounts, like personal experiences, very intimate things, with broader social context and historical events and stuff like that. And I found this kind of writing very inspiring. But at the beginning, when I read those things, I was so bored, because I found it like ridiculous. Like those people were trying to talk about like something very concrete, very social, but they had no they weren't quoting anyone. It was like very loose, and it was really outrageous to me as a as like someone very used to like papers. But then I grew fond of it, because I think when we write at university, we tend to forget that writing has this very emotional aspect to it, and connecting to an audience is very important, and poetics is a major component of writing, like the words we choose, like the pace of it, and all those things. And this is what happened in the 80s, with like the representation crisis and postmodernism and like writing culture and all those things, where like we were like, oh wow, actually writing is not this mere verbatim of research. It's like it's a practice. So so now what I try to do when I write is to kind of like layer those things, and to think of how concepts and social like systemic aspect of things kind of relate to my own experience, and how I can make sense of the macro with the micro, and vice versa. So yeah, like that's in a very like formal way. Now I'm kind of forcing myself to like layer it in this way, and to always add like the personal in it, and to see how the personal relates to like the contextual, and kind of like move back and forth from those two levels. And I think it does a better job to connect with people. It's not for the same purpose than an academic paper. You don't convey as much knowledge per se, but I think it does a better job at making sense for people, because ultimately this is what you do when you write for a non like specialist audience. Is like you're not trying just to convey a message, but you're trying to help them make sense of something that they didn't know of before, or that they couldn't make sense of before. So yeah, I don't know if that makes sense.
Totally makes sense. Thanks.
I saw a bunch of messages in the chat. I don't know if anything was. Oh, thank you for putting the Alexander G. But go, like, yeah, Sean, you had a question. Oh, thank you, Pierre Olivier.
I kind of have a question. I just don't really know how to phrase it. But I'm just kind of curious what the process was like when you switched from the cooperative back into illustration. Like you mentioned, I was gonna ask like what I was gonna ask like how you think you stood out, like how your anthropology degree might have helped with like jumps. I don't know if it was a jump start in a career, but like helping with that. But then you kind of answered that, the big picture awareness. I guess I'm wondering at what point what the process was like, and also at what point did you realize exactly how your anthropology degree was going to be useful when it came to presenting your work and getting all these different commissions and stuff?
I think like for the jump from the co-op to becoming an illustrator, yeah, I think I always try when I'm when I'm facing like this like super intense like life crisis, like conundrum, whatever. I'm always trying to like step back and like think of it as some sort of like social like map, where like, okay, like I'm here, I'm connecting to all those things, and I'm trying to identify how my desires and my ideas and my prejudices are informed by my background, And I think this is an exercise that is like very important to do on a regular basis, and that is made easier through like a social science background in a way, because it's kind of like a very reflexive, meditative thing, but like by opening yourself up more. So yeah, I was always trying to understand, is the reason I feel this way because I really feel this way, or is it because like there is a gap between expectations from like my background and like what am I supposed to do and what I'm really feeling or whatever, all those things, you know. So that's one thing, and doing this exercise regularly helps me also like today as an illustrator, because I constantly have to remind myself that the way the work I'm doing right now is so like I'm always have to keep myself in check, because it's so easy to be sucked into the pace and the values of the industry I'm working in, and forgetting that those things come from somewhere, and you know what belongs to the system and what belongs to me. So I always have to like keep myself in check from time to time, and then in the way of like getting commissions and and all those things, like I don't know like how like directly like social science helped me, but I feel yeah it does, because I realize it only now talking to more and more illustrators. I realize how like very little clue they have of the creative industry as a system and our role in it. And I think from the very beginning, I was aware of like, okay, what is an art director? Who does he or she works for? And like in what context, like what's the daily life look like, and who are those like people in this network? And understanding that made me communicate much more efficiently to them, because I understood like what their priority looked like and like what they need, and to kind of like predict their needs and stuff like that. And I think you can do that very easily when you understand like that you know you don't have like a very like narrow focus. You just have to expand it and like to understand other people's perspective. And it makes me a better collaborator, because so much of what I do is collaborations with like people, and again putting yourself in someone else's shoes is like super important. And this is what we learn in anthropology in general, is like getting beyond like your own perspective. And I think this is very appreciated by a lot of people, because like not a lot of people is able to do that very efficiently and on a constant on a daily basis basically. And I think yeah it makes up for a lot of like my success in my work, because it's not so much about making beautiful images. It's really about like being someone with whom it's nice to work basically. And I think this is like way more important than like being a good drawer, because like so many of us like can make like beautiful illustrations, but like this is not the recipe for success. Yeah.
Right, thank you. I don't, if does anyone have if there's any other questions or anything else you wanted to talk about, Julian?
No, I think like I feel like I've ranted for like an hour like nonstop. So yeah, but I'd be happy to like answer other questions if you have any, but like, no pressure.
It just for anyone else. It's not getting too late, but in case we want to start wrapping up, because this was like, it might be rambling to you, but it's very insightful for us, and very very I think useful and interesting information.
Cool, thank you.
So yeah, if anyone else, if no one else has any questions or anything like that, some Payment's telling you thank you in the chat.
Thank you. Thank you for coming.
Yeah, thank you, Payment, for coming as well and staying. If that's it, then we can end the recording here. Thank you again, Julian, for
Thank you for inviting me.
sharing your experience. Yeah, no, thank
Yeah.
you.
And good job for like this series. I mean, like that's really, really exciting. Like